Welcome, everyone. I'm Veronica Roberts, Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Blanton Museum at the University of Texas at Austin. And we had some technical glitches when I introduced our most recent Curated Conversation series, so I'm re-recording the introduction to Madam C.J. Walker, iconic trailblazer, and then we're going to cut to the live broadcast led by Marilyn Johnson, a member of our National Leadership Board, a former IBM Vice President, and someone who helped bring this remarkable work into the Blanton's collection. This portrait by artist Sonya Clark features the trailblazer, Madam C.J. Walker. She was a pioneer in hair care business, which is why this is made out of black plastic hair combs. And Madam Walker is believed to be the nation's first self-made female millionaire. I first learned about her in college and was stunned that the first self-made female millionaire in this country was an African-American woman. And even more stunning was that she made her fortune in spite of pretty unbelievable odds. Her heyday, her business heyday, was in the 1910s, long before the women's suffrage and long before the civil rights movement. You can see that Sonya Clark made her portrait of Madam Walker using this 1914 photo of the businesswoman taken by an African-American photographer named Addison Scurlock. The Addison Scurlock photo was also used for stamps that were issued in 1998. Little about Madam Walker's beginnings would have suggested she'd sit for a formal portrait like this, wind up on a U.S. postage stamp, or end up being the subject for numerous works of art. She was born Sarah Breedlove in Delta, Louisiana in 1867, which was shortly after the end of slavery. It was so soon after the end of slavery, in fact, that she was the only one of her many siblings who was born free. But while she was technically free, she was orphaned by the age of 7 and born into very impoverished circumstances. By the time she was 20, she was widowed and had a daughter of her own, not the traditional path to fame and fortune. But she earned her fortune and her fame by building a prosperous beauty empire, best known for hair care products. And what's interesting about her business is that women actually suffered from hair loss a lot in the turn of the century. Hygiene was just very different in those days, and people had scalp issues, women had significant hair loss, and Madam Walker was among the women who suffered from this problem, the many women, black and white, who suffered from this problem. And as a businesswoman, she didn't just create these beauty products, she also employed thousands of African-American women whom she dubbed Walker beauty agents, who would have otherwise been relegated to really low-paying jobs in less than ideal circumstances, hard, difficult, back-breaking jobs like the one she had as a washerwoman. She used her married name Walker and referred to herself in ads as Madam C.J. Walker. Even, I think, the business name revealed her natural business instincts and smarts about how to promote herself. Here you see her most successful product line, the Wonderful Hair Grower, and you also notice that her business was headquartered in Indianapolis. She settled in Indianapolis in part because it was the crossroads of America at the time, and her product could be shipped by train easily to the rest of the country. But I think what I really admire so much about her and how she's ended up being the subject of a biography and works of art is not just her entrepreneurial skills or her financial acumen, it's really her activism and her philanthropy. She was committed to using her fortune to help elevating other African Americans. She was really an activist, and she used her national profile to advocate for social betterment and also for racial justice. She really stands out in this photo with Booker T. Washington and other prominent African Americans, all of whom, of course, are men. But part of her genius was her marketing savvy. She was a commanding public speaker with tremendous charisma. She gave these illustrated lectures at historic Black colleges, churches, business conventions, anywhere she could get an audience. She would travel across the country to do this. And in fact, in 1917, after recovering from exhaustion in Hot Springs, Arkansas, she did a tour of Texas, and she came to Austin, and then went on to San Marcos, Seguin, San Antonio, Houston, Beaumont, etc. And she would speak sometimes to her employed beauty agents, Walker beauty agents, and but also to individuals who were just interested in hearing about how Black women could have financial independence. That was really her mission, to talk about that. But she was also tireless in her commitment to helping others, and she spoke about that and she gave money to the first YMCA in Indianapolis that was established for Black people, and you're seeing This is actually the dedication of that YMCA in Indianapolis, where she was one of the leading donors. She also underwrote scholarships at Tuskegee Institute, that where Booker T. Washington was the president, and she gave generously to other Black colleges. She contributed also financially to anti-lynching campaigns and other really important moral and racial issues of her day. I think she really equally recognized the power of her pocketbook and of the podium, but she really had to fight to have a place at the podium, since the progressive African-American community in the 1910s was male-dominated, but she, didn't become a successful businesswoman by being timid and doing what was expected of her. She really implored upon the beauty agents that she employed that they should in turn use their economic clout to help other African Americans and to be advocates and agents for social change. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn Johnson and the live feed of our program.
Also, I think we should add, she was not educated formally. She took classes from time to time. She learned to read, she learned to write, but she didn't have formal education. She was smart enough, though, to surround herself with very educated people, and she was humble enough to admit her own insecurities, her own shortcomings, so she learned from them. One anecdote that I ran across when I was really studying this after I read the book by her great-great-granddaughter, Olivia Bundles, is that she really worked for a pharmacy, and they didn't explain that in the Netflix movie, but she worked for the Schultz Pharmacy Company and had trouble with her own hair, and she met the character that was depicted, and it was Annie Monroe. They called her Addie Malone in the film, but she knew she had to improve. She had to improve that product, the smell of it, the smoothness of it, and she wanted a series, and she ended up with 23 different products for beauty for women, and not just women of color. She wanted all women to feel beautiful. So I want people to understand that she wasn't educated, she was a brilliant marketing brain, and she knew when to bring in the talent that she needed. And that self-made millionaire, and the way the movie on Netflix was entitled Self-Made, it was because she was the first female self-made millionaire in the United States. I've heard other people say, well, she was the first Black female millionaire. No, she was the first self-made female because of her tier marketing, like Avon, like Mary Kay, like Tupperware back in the day. She knew that she could empower other women, but she pulled from the strength of all of these men around her, and she was just brilliant and intrepid is the best word that I can come up with. That's her driving her car in 1911, I think it was, yeah. She traveled extensively, by the way. She traveled to the West Indies. She traveled to Europe, finding more clients, more distributors. And at the peak of her career, she was grossing revenue of $1,000 a day with over 2,000 employees. That was in the manufacturing and the bookkeeping and the business operations. She had 10 times that in sales agents. She called them her army, her agent army. And she brought these women in for education and training, just like her competitor, but she really wanted everyone to feel beautiful on their own, not to look like anyone else or not to degrade themselves personally. She really wanted everyone to find their own beauty and wear their hairstyle the way they felt comfortable. That's what made her so popular and attractive to multicultural audiences and clients. And I love this picture because, folks, this sculpture is 10 feet tall. It's 3,840 combs. These little black combs fitted together with the teeth plucked out to make a silhouette of her profile. So the way the Blanton Museum has exhibited it, she has her own wall. Now I have to help you understand how this all came about. I retired from IBM in 2012 here in Austin, Texas. And I was president of an organization called the National Council of Negro Women. Remember that because it was started by Mary McLeod Bethune. Mary McLeod Bethune and Madam C.J. Walker were friends back in the day, and we're talking the 19th century. They were two women, one very educated, one very ambitious. When I went through my docent training, because I was recruited by Ray Williams, who is the director of education for the Blanton, he wanted more diverse gallery instructors. So we are volunteers. We interviewed just like we were interviewing or competing for a job offer. And Ray took us through a lot of presentation training as well as art history training. And in that training, one day, we were being taught by the curator of prints, Francesca Consegra. She's passed away since the time that I met her, but God rest her soul. She was brilliant in her art knowledge and her technique of teaching and bringing out and inspiring her class, which were all of the new docents in training. Francesca was talking about the way art is exhibited and how prints have to be stored and protected and they can't have too much light. And I raised my hand and said, you know, I'd like to know, how do you get art? Do you have a budget every year? I came from corporate background. So I thought they were at liberty to go shopping or borrowing and lending with other museums. And she said, well, some of our collection, Marilyn, we own. And some of it we trade to put together an exhibit for a special artist that we're featuring. And I said, well, when will I see somebody that looks like me on exhibit? And she said to me, well, I tell you how this works. Through fundraisers, donations, contributions, we acquire art. And it just hit me, my light bulbs went off. And I thanked her for that deviation from her standard presentation. The next day I returned to class and I gave Francesca a check for $5,000. I didn't know if that was a lot or a little bit. I didn't know what I wanted to buy or show, but I wanted to start a fund for an iconic, aesthetic, and historical piece of art that would tell the story of successful Black women, African-American heritage women. And from there, I decided to get something so big that anybody that comes to the Blanton would not miss this exhibit. So I didn't know if it would take me 1 year or 20 years to donate enough money. But I had the thought, since I was president of National Council of Negro Women, there were other presidents of business leaders, the NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers, the Lynx, Town Lake, and the Lynx chapter called Lone Star. I knew one of those organization leaders. And I went after other leaders of the Black Chamber of Commerce in Austin and brought them all to the Blanton. To make a long story short, we previewed the idea, hey, we'd like to all go together, raise enough money to get a work of art. And Veronica and I went to lunch and she pulled out a picture, the one that you're looking at now, and explained how it was made with these combs. And I said, Veronica, you've made my dream come true. We'll get the money. So all of those organizations, we'll talk about a little later, continued on our journey. And it took us about 2.5 years, but I didn't want to go to Robert Smith here in Austin and say, hey, you're rich, can you write us a check? I wanted every organization that had the means to have the opportunity to own this concept, this homage to a shero, a real business leader that really goes unsung in our history books unless you're taking a particular type of education. And Veronica, I'm going to toss it back to you now to explain Sonya Clarke's brilliance, because I didn't know Sonya. when you showed me this work of art. I absolutely love her now. This chart, by the way, I wanted to highlight all of those organizations. So Stacy, if you'll just leave it up there, because there's some people on this Zoom conference that will see their names. HEB, for all of you that shop at HEB, not only did they help with the fundraising, they sponsored the reception when we did the unveiling. Their community relations executive actually showed up at the Blanton. Some board members, Jeannie and Michael Klein, that are very generous to the Blanton, found out how I was doing this and gave money. But then you see others, the two Links chapters, I think they were in co-opetition there. The National Black MBA, headed up at that time by a friend of mine, Gregory, who really gave personally, like Tam, but also the organizations gave from their community kitty or funds that they collected. So it was really team effort to get this work in. And like I said, it was a dream come true because it was a perfect fit, bringing Madam CJ to Austin, Texas, and a part of the Blanton family. And we also adopted Sonya Clark, the artist herself.
Yeah, and as background, I proposed this work to Marilyn, and because of the monumental scale, and you can see this wonderful quote about how Sonya Clark constructed it. It's made out of 3,840 pocket combs, and I love what she says about not just capturing the national legacy of hair culture and gender and race politics of hair, but the way that as disposable objects, they parallel the low social status of African-American women born in the late 1800s, but when they're combined by thousands, they become a monumental tapestry, signifying her magnitude and success, Walker's magnitude and success, despite her humble beginnings. And I think that's such a beautiful description. And you can see Sonya putting the work together here, and how she made it was to create a grid using hair combs, and she removes the teeth of the combs to create either the lightness on the face or a darker part of the hair. She'll leave the teeth of the combs in. It's different from any of her other works. It is a little bit unique in using combs in this way and on this scale. But the place that I saw this work was at the Museum of Art and Design in New York, and I was just so blown away by how brilliantly it was constructed and how there was so much meaning in the materials. So that's how I became familiar with the work. And I'll just add, Marilyn mentioned that she is a shiro and that she deserves to be better known. I think her reputation is much more significant now, especially with the Netflix series. But I think that one of the things I was struck by is the way that that I felt like every African-American person I know is aware of who Madam C.J. Walker is, but I felt that she was not as well known outside of the African-American community. And I was really struck by who do we learn about in our history books and who do we not learn about in our encyclopedias and our history books.
Well, let's stop here. I want to introduce Toya Bell. Toya is a member of the Town Lakes Links, and she just happened to get the memo to wear gray that day. So this turned out to be a perfect photo. She's a soror, an AKA, a soror of mine. But at the time this picture was taken, she was actually chair of Leadership Austin. So when Sonya came to actually talk about the work of art in front of an audience at the museum, we invited every member of every organization that did or did not give, but we had a full house. And this picture just reminds me of how we felt that day of the unveiling. It was like floating on air. So Toya, thank you for your leadership.
And thank you, Marilyn, for yours, because I joke at the museum that it's the longest label in the entire museum because there are so many people on the credit line.
But we use it. I've got so many stories about teaching this work of art to students, especially students of another genetic predisposition, because they don't readily know. They may now with the Netflix film, but we actually unveiled this in 2017. And this is a more mature group of students. But when I would have the first, second, third graders who are just not afraid to guess and embarrassed, I say, who do you think this is? Some of them would say, that's you. That's your mother. They could recognize that she was African American. But I'll never forget the day one little second grader said, I know, that's Princess Leia. Look at her hair. The hairstyle was what I wanted them to focus on, because I had not told them what the work was made of. But when they realized they could see it was hair combs, I said, what do you think her profession was? Why do you think she's up here on the wall? And I would show them a photo of the postage stamp and pass it out. And the night of the unveiling, we actually had printed combs with Madam C.J. Walker's name on the hair combs that we gave out as souvenirs and thank yous. So I would show them the comb and pass it around and then tell her story. Now, why this is important is I can remember the glistening and the smiling and the giggling in the eyes of the Black students that knew who she was, or they knew why those combs were so important. They felt proud. They related to the work of art, which is what any docent, any gallery instructor really wants to see. An art enthusiast, a dilettante like myself, appreciating the value, the expression, the meaning. And it warms my heart when I walk through the museum now and I just listen to commentary by other people who are just casually observing, and they get closer and closer and closer, or they stand to the side, because when you look from the side, you actually see the shadow in reverse image of her face. There you are, perfect timing. You can look through the side and see the reflection. And that's Savon, one of our gallery instructors, in the jean jacket.
And I love that you're pointing this out, Marilyn. One of the things that I love about the experience of this work is the way it changes depending on how close or far you are from the piece. From a distance, you can see her in this formidable portrait, but as you get really close, it becomes a grid and it becomes abstract, almost like a mosaic, and you see the pieces. And I think it just reminds us to take different, I love the way Ray Williams talks about this, our director of education. He talks about understanding things from different perspectives, and the way that happens with this work, that you have a very different perspective up close. And you even mentioned the hair combs. The brand happens to be Unbreakable. It's the brand that she chose. It's just the kind, it wasn't intentional. She didn't have it imprinted on the plastic, but it just happens to, if you get really close, you can see the brand. And I just love that detail, this idea of sort of an unbreakable spirit.
And Madam C.J. Walker was truly unbreakable. Remember, she started with $2 and a dream. And it was because she was orphaned at 7 years old. She was married at 14, a mother at 17. And she married at 14 because her older sister in Mississippi was given the responsibility to raise her. And she really was not comfortable with her brother-in-law being much younger. So she married. She had one child, and she literally moved to St. Louis to get work. When she found out that the World's Fair was going to be in St. Louis, being the entrepreneur that she is, or was at that time, she decided now's the time to get Schultz to analyze Annie's product and let me improve it, and I'll have the biggest audience. Now remember, in 1912, there were only 10 million Blacks in the United States. She ended up relocating to Indianapolis, moving her headquarters there. And the only work professionally for Black women in Indianapolis was working for either one of the two Black newspapers or Madam C.J. Walker. That was it. And a lot of people that were her customers became her agent army. And she spread it throughout the globe.
And we have a question, Marilyn. I'll just jump in with one of the questions, which is, and thank you, by the way, for sharing. So many of you are sharing your recollections of the talk and the one of my favorite evenings and days at the Blanton. Is about how long it took for Sonya Clarke to create the work, and we get asked that a lot. She doesn't remember the exact number of days, but it was a long time, nearly a year. It was very important, work for her. And what she did is she used that Addison Scurlock photograph and she gridded it, and she assigned numbers to every part of the grid. And then together with her studio assistants, who at the time were in Richmond, Virginia, they wove it together kind of like a tapestry. And Sonya really considers herself somebody who works in fiber and in textile. But there's a way in which, I think, Marilyn, you may have mentioned this before, it does sort of feel like a tapestry or a textile, even though it's made out of plastic. People don't even recognize what the material is from a distance. They think it's a textile, or it has that look like a tapestry.
And so the next slide shows you another tapestry at the Blanton by an African or Ghanaian artist, El Adnatsui. And I remember when the Blanton brought this in, I read the article in the Austin Statesman newspaper, because to me, this looked like kente cloth. It looked like fabric, but it's not. It's literally bottle caps from whiskey bottles, which is how a lot of the workers in Western Africa, and especially Ghana, were paid. So El Adnatsui had his students collect, just picking up all these caps. Now imagine getting paid in alcohol, what that does to the family's overall wealth, needing food and shelter and clothing. But these men, by the time they got home, they would have tossed the bottle cap, consumed the liquor. So this is too a social statement, using throwaway trash materials. The reason it looks colored at the border like kente cloth would is that's the reverse side of the bottle cap. They pounded them flat, used copper wiring to connect them together. So I wanted to show this slide. It's much the same collaboration, using what would be unusual products to come up to tell a story and to have something aesthetically outstanding. And the Blanton owns this piece just like it owns Madam C.J. Walker's sculpture. So it's here to stay.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, if you don't mind advancing this last statement, we put Maggie Walker on view as part of our reinstallation of our collection in 2017, I think it was. It was an icon. It became very quickly one of the most used works for teaching, requested works for teaching. I also wanted to share this wonderful image. I recently went to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., and I loved seeing that Madam C.J. Walker has an entire display there with some of her early hair care products. And you can see that wonderful Addison Scurlock photo in the upper left that inspired Sonya Clarke's work. And if you keep going to the next image, Stacy, I also wanted to mention that when we put the portrait of Madam C.J. Walker up, continuous view ever since, because it is so beloved and became really an icon. It's really become, I think, one of the icons of our collection, up there with the El Adnatsui, the Ellsworth Kelly building, and maybe the Jerry Bywater's oil field girls. It's one of the our collection. We will have to take that, though, for the best of reasons. In 2021, Sonya is going to have a mid-career survey of her work in her hometown of Washington, D.C. at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And so I wanted to mention that I know that 2021 is a ways away. If any of you end up being in D.C., I think that would be an amazing opportunity to see the full arc of her career. And here's just an image of the website where you can also see there's some more information if anyone wants to read up and see more. But we are happy, Marilyn and I are happy to take questions. And I just want to thank you, Marilyn, for for just your tireless advocacy and also bringing so many people to the museum. I don't know if you mentioned that that Alelia Bundles, the great-great-granddaughter of Madam Walker, has seen this work, which is really an honor.
And she's the author of the book, On Her Own Ground. And this is a signed copy because Alelia, like myself, we do public speaking, and we were on tour actually at the NAACP conference, the Women's Day, and she and I were both speaking, and she had her book there, and I said, "You've got to sign one for me." I ran into her in DC much later and told her we were working on getting this piece here, and she said, "When you unveil it, let me know, I'll come." And as a woman of her own words, she definitely did. And the Lynx did host her. She's an amazing, amazing journalist. So to write her great-great-grandmother's story the way she did, and then have the movie rights, have it produced and shown on Netflix, she's really made a statement of history. There have been other books and publications about Madam CJ, but this one is written from a family perspective. I mean, she shares a lot. I'll tell you one story. Madam CJ died rich. She left 1/3 of her money to her daughter, gave 2/3 away to charity. And I did the math. She left $5,000 to the YMCA that she helped build in Indianapolis. She left $5,000 to Mary McLeod Bethune's college, Bethune-Cookman College. She left $5,000 to the Anti-Lynching League to stop lynching in these United States. Because remember, she was born when Andrew Johnson was president. Then Grant was the first president that Madam CJ was aware of. And after Grant was Hayes. I mean, these guys weren't exactly fighting for the rights of Black women. So she came through some really tough times, but she was an activist politically and socially, and an entrepreneur, and someone who empowered other women to not work for $1.50 a day doing laundry, but to generate revenues of $1,000 a day for her business, and paid them well, invited them into her home, which is still an iconistic estate in Irvington. And I've got to say this. In the movie in Netflix, they showed her running into one of her neighbors. I think it was it wasn't Vanderbilt, so it must have been a Roosevelt. And Madam CJ built her house with 35 rooms. Vanderbilt's house had 50 rooms. And Rockefeller, his house had 45 rooms. But she positioned her house in Irvington, New York, so that you could see it. They secluded theirs behind shrubbery and walls. But she was proud of that. And she wanted, when she had her agents on the property, she wanted the town to know she was in town, and so was her army.
That's wonderful. And Marilyn, we have a question from Gay Gaddis, who I think, and there's a lot of wonderful praise for you in this lovely thread. But the question for you was, she wanted to thank you for your wonderful work and your persistence, but also ask you if Madam Walker's daughter actually carried on the business, because she writes, it seems Madam Walker died fairly young, and you're right, Gay, she died at the age of 51, very young. Do you want to take that one, Marilyn?
Yes, the business was carried on, not by the daughter though, and it stayed in business. Gay, thank you for that. Gay is someone that I admire. She was owner of T3, one of the largest marketing firms in the country, headquartered out of Austin, Texas, but a woman-owned business. And Gay, that business that Madam CJ started was the CJ Walker Beauty, was around until 1981 before they actually closed the doors and sold the rights. But if you go to any Sephora store these days, you'll see a product line that uses her name. They have the branding rights. So the daughter didn't run the business, but the legacy lived on through the 1980s. And still through today, we recognize the product by the brand. Thank you for the question. Hi, Tina Wing. I see you.
Hi there.
And Lorraine Lasden just added your comment about Sephora that that the brand is now owned by Sundial Now. I love that so many people here have been following Madam Walker and her history so closely.
Well, maybe we'll get history to become her story one day, where we learn more about women that contributed more than Betsy Ross, sewing the flag. And Florence Nightingale being, the nurse. There are so many intrepid women, and some of you are on this phone call because I know you, who have led and continue to lead in social advocacy, politics, leaders in religion. I mean, when I think about all my Sunday school teachers were women. So we've got to start telling our story better. And maybe we need to start funding our story better. And that's why I was so thrilled that Simone Witcha, who is the director of the Blanton, accepted my little $5,000 check and actually extended an opportunity for me to join the leadership board at the Blanton in, I think it was 2014 when I joined the board. And I'm still a part of the board, so I still have a little bit of influence in suggesting and recommending and reaching out how we should present, when we should reopen the museum safely for all of our visitors to appreciate and value the hard work. It's a great staff. You're really talented. I've learned a lot from you, Veronica, because you're so smart about art and art history. But I just never knew when I interviewed with Ray Williams that I would end up in a position of celebrating a shero of mine forever, because Madam CJ's sculpture is here in Austin to stay.
That's right. And we also have a question from Heidi about whether Madam Walker tried to hire predominantly women or Black women. And my understanding is that she hired Black women, and that was really integral. And although there were white women who bought her products, I do know that.
Well, and she had a full service salon. She had white customers who happened to have the kind of hair that she knew how to manage. They did nails, they did facials, and there just weren't places like this for women of color or women of meager means. So she was open to elevating beauty for all women. My pooch is trying to get in the shot here. He's whining, so if you hear Jinx in the background, I apologize. He's a ham.
We have another question about from Catherine Cody. Thank you, Catherine. About, has CJ Walker been memorialized in other works of art? And that's a great question outside of the beautiful stamps. Catherine, there is another work, another portrait made out of combs that is in Indianapolis, also by Sonya Clark. And I was actually involved in the commission of that. It's in Indianapolis really reveres Madam CJ Walker. There's no one in Indianapolis that you will meet really who doesn't know who she is, because her business was headquartered there for many years. And that was a really smart business decision on her part, because Indianapolis was really considered the crossroads of America at the time. And all the trains went through there, so she could get her products in and out very quickly. And if any of you go to Indianapolis, I encourage you to go to the Walker Theater. There's an amazing theater. Because she couldn't see movies, she just basically created her own cultural arts space in the town, and it's named for her. It's the Walker Theater, and it was used as I think a jazz club for a long time, and now it's more of a museum and center, and it's a really special spot. So you'll see signs of her, of Madam Walker all throughout the city, but I'm not aware of other works of art. I'll look into that, but I think Sonya has been really, to Marilyn's point, her story has been under the radar for far too long. And I think it took a female artist like Sonya Clark to really elevate her and remind us of her significance.
And we should also say Sonya Clark is world renowned. She has work in China, Australia, Italy, France. She is well known, but until she did this piece, I say especially for me, although it wasn't commissioned, it really spoke to me. I started appreciating her other work. Veronica, could you describe how she played the violin with hair from someone's dreadlock that donated it to her?
Yeah, and I remember that her husband is a really wonderful, accomplished musician. So I think that there's a lot. That's a pretty talented household, Sonya and her husband's. And your point about the hair, we did get another question about her other paintings that use actual hair. Sonya's used hair in quite a number of works. You saw the Afro Abe dollar bill. And she talks about just being very interested in the politics of hair and the history and culture of hair when she was growing up in Washington, D.C. This is kind of an amazing story. She lived across the street from the ambassador of Benin, and she would go over to their house and get her hair braided in these traditional Benin hairstyles. So the comb was something she grew up with. It was also something her grandmother had an interest in textiles and background in sewing. So she thinks of hair as a kind of thread. And you can really understand that this notion of textile, of thread, being connected to hair, you can weave with it. The same, I mean, we talk about a hairstyle as a weave, right? So these are languages that she's brought together. She's also done a piece recently, unraveling the Confederate flag. That's been one of the most, where it's a performative, participatory work where audience members or anyone in a gallery or museum unravels the threads of the Confederate flag in a intimate conversation with her in a gallery together, which I think is quite a powerful piece.
And she brought a video and played it for us of this bow to a violin. Instead of horsehair, it was human hair from the head of a man of color. And she actually wanted to see if the sound would be unique or distinctive. But what our audience recognized was the tune they were playing was the Negro National Anthem on that violin. It was just a heartfelt moment that I'll never forget. Sonya is awesome. So definitely, if you're going to be in DC next year, you want to see the pride of Sonya Clarke from the Austin perspective. Madam CJ will be on loan for that exhibit.
That's right. And we have another question from Sharon about where Madam Walker is buried. And I'm so glad you asked this because I would like to visit her cemetery as well. And I think you saw the photograph of her in the really beautiful, elegant car. And I believe that was in Harlem, but she was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery, which is in New York.
In the Bronx.
In the Bronx, yeah. So Woodlawn Cemetery. I'll put that in the Q&A for anyone else who might want to visit. And Marilyn, do you want to talk about the mansion that she created towards the end of her life?
Oh my gosh, you've got to Google Luego. It looks like an Italian villa. I actually Googled it just to get some more detail. It's on 3 acres of property in Irvington, and I actually lived in Tarrytown, New York when I worked in IBM headquarters for a few years, and it was being sold at that time. And actually, it now is managed and run by the National Trust for Historic Treasures. It's been totally restored, all 35 rooms. It's an amazing property, just beautiful. And like I said, you can see it from Broadway, the actual main thoroughfare. Luaro they started building it in 1916. It took 2 years to complete. It's been totally restored to more original paint and colors, and it's just elegant. All you have to do is Google Madam C.J. Walker Estate or Lewaro, Luaro Estate in Irvington, New York, and they'll walk you through a total tour of the property. And I don't know its value now, but when she built it, it was like a phenomenal amount of money, like $250,000 for her to complete this. But just to give you a translation, the $5,000 that she left to those organizations that I listed, among the 2/3 that she left to charities, I did the math. It's $96,000 in today's money. So can you imagine leaving several organizations $100,000 just to improve them because you're no longer going to be alive to donate? That's why I'm so humbled that all of these organizations, Black professionals, board members, HEB, everyone jumped on board and contributed to that big label beside this beautiful sculpture, because we're all a part of correcting, restoring, and uplifting the history of a legacy of a wonderful African-American leader.
Beautifully said, Marilyn. And we have your mentioning of the mansion that she created and lived in prompted a really interesting comment by Professor Tara Dudley, who's a professor at the Austin School of Architecture here at UT. And she's published about the homes of Madam Walker and her daughter, Lilia. So I'm thrilled to hear that. Tara, I hope you'll send us the essay. We'd love to read that. I haven't already read it. And she's asking if there will be additional programming about Madam Walker in conjunction with this work. So we'll happily consider that, because this is one of the works that just keeps on giving, and that the talk that Sonya gave was truly amazing. We'd love to have her back and think about other programs that we can put on. There also was a question for you, Marilyn, which I appreciate, which is, have you helped to collect any more art, or is there any other art you are interested in? And I happen to see some work behind your head above your couch, so maybe you can share. There's lots of art I know you're interested in. So Marilyn, will you share?
Yes, Veronica's talking about my Chihulis back there on the wall. That's Dale Chihuly, who does glass art. Many of you may know his work because you've been to Las Vegas in the Bellagio and you've looked up at the ceiling. That's Dale Chihuly. Now, for those of you that don't know me as well, I grew up in West Virginia, where iconistically the talent in art expression was a little city called Blinko. Blinko glass was how we decorated our homes, different colors. And when I found out about Dale Chihuly, who is in Seattle, Washington, where my kids live, I was able to actually tour his site, his studio. His studio is his home. And I was with a group of women. It was a speaking engagement for the International Women's Forum. I know that some of you are familiar with that leadership organization. We went to his studio to just take a tour, and he walked in the room. I couldn't believe it, because in my mind, I'm thinking, how can I afford just one artifact from Dale Chihuly's collection? As I had experienced his work in Las Vegas, in Kew Gardens in England, and other places that I've traveled. He's in Indiana, but you'll see his work, his glass-blown art. These prints I actually bought on that trip because I couldn't afford an actual blown glass piece of work from his original collection. But I do like Dale Chihuly. He wears the eye patch, for those of you that don't know him. He's still alive. He's great. But I like William Tolliver's work because he speaks to cultural events in Black or African American heritage lives. I own a piece of his work called The Baptism. It's actually beautiful, and my brother is a minister. He has his own church in Georgia, so I have my brother's name written on the back of that painting so that when I expire, my family will know this goes to Roy Johnson, because I admire his leadership, his courage, and his work. So most of the art that I own, there's a sentimental reason or value. And one day, somehow, I may be able to get a Sonya Clarke piece for my house. Thank you for the question.
Yes, and I want to come over and see that. We also had a wonderful question about if we were to try to imagine what Madam C.J. Walker would think of the Black Lives Matter movement. What would she think of that?
She'd be writing checks. She would donate her army. She would have those ladies out in every city making a statement. Like I said, the word I use is intrepid. When you talked about the combs, the name of the company that printed, or the 3,840 combs that Sonya used, I mean, there's no coincidence. I think the universe has a way of expressing itself, that the comb company would be called Unbreakable. Madam CJ was unbreakable. And she would be so proud of these young people, because imagine now, she was 19 years old when she moved to St. Louis with a baby. She did remarry Mr. Walker and took his name. And oh, by the way, I don't know for fact, but the reason she was called Madam CJ, I can remember hearing younger than me girls in my neighborhood who were white calling my grandmother Roberta. And I was like, there's no way that's, so disrespectful. But Black women in the community were called by their first name. Madam CJ didn't want anybody to know her first name. So she became Madam Walker. Her husband said, let them call you Madam. You're now my wife. She assumed a role and a position far beyond her dream and the $2.
That's right. And that's beautiful. And I just want to add that when she employed nearly or roughly 1,000 African-American women, and she really used her role as a businesswoman to encourage those women to also improve their communities. I mean, she, as Marilyn has said, she was intrepid, but she really was an activist, and she thought that this was in order to improve the lives of Black men and women. People had to speak up, and they also had to earn a living wage. So I think that was she used that platform really beautifully, and she was very charismatic. I think that was also, she spoke powerfully. She was comfortable at a podium. I wish we had recordings of her, Marilyn.
I know, that would be outstanding. I'll ask Olivia if they have her voice somewhere in the family archives.
Yeah.
Any other
and then one other question. Yeah, we have one other question from Margit about how was she accepted as a woman in the African-American male business community? And I'm happy to take that. And if you want to elaborate, Marilyn, I think it was reluctantly at first. Honestly, I think that there was so much sexism, and there was sexism in the Black community, the white community, and every community. That's just the way it was. So I think, but money speaks, and she was powerful and successful, and I think that eventually that people paid attention to what she was doing because she was so successful.
You said it right. I was going to say money talks, and we know what walks. So Madam CJ earned her right. She was not taken seriously at first because of the beauty industry not being taken seriously. But again, there were 10 million Blacks in the United States when she started her business. Probably 52 or 4% of them were female who did appreciate someone recognizing them for their beauty. So the men, they got on board real fast, especially politicians who liked those donations. But imagine she was putting her money where her mouth was. She left $100,000 to the anti-lynching. Now they lynched women too. But I mean, I remember stories of being worried about a Black man coming home. He's late. Where is he? What's going on? And it does even today cross your mind. I worry about my son. I worry about my nephews because they are targeted. They always have been. The world is getting better. The world is getting better.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for Marilyn for leading the charge, not only in the acquisition, but also this evening. And thank you everyone else, especially the many people on this call who helped make this possible. That long label is only possible thanks to all of you. I also just wanted to say a few final words about our next few programs. Our next curated conversation is going to be on Tuesday, June 23rd at 5 p.m. And the topic is Cats and Dogs, a Curator Q&A with special guests. That will feature a live Q&A with curatorial assistant Christian Wurst and Blanton Fellow of European Art, Chrissy Zappella, exploring some works featuring fuzzy friends from the museum's collection and special guests from Austin Pets Alive. And then to watch past curated conversations, or if you want to watch this one, take virtual art tours and explore other museum from home content, just go to our website. It's blantonmuseum.org/museum from home. And that's where this program will ultimately be housed. And if you'd like to show your support, you can become a member at blantonmuseum.org /membership. You can also support our Blanton Together Fund, which is under support on the website. And if you want info about upcoming programs and other news, sign up for our newsletter. That's on our website under subscribe. And finally, if you have any topics you'd love to see us cover in future curated conversations, drop us a line at media@blantonmuseum.org. Thank you again, and we hope to see you next Tuesday. Thank you again, Marilyn, for being here.
Can I give a plug for Carlotta, who is the marketing director? We see her picture. You're outstanding, and I'm on the marketing committee, so we focus on development. Thank you for this opportunity to showcase a wonderful work of art by a very talented artist who are my sisters. And thank you. We have over 100 people on this Zoom conference, so it just goes to show what you can do when you're determined.